This is Lesson 3, Algebraic Proportions. The objective of this lesson is that you can solve an algebraic proportion. So one thing you need to know is that a ratio is a comparison of two numbers with division. It can be written in any three different ways, like a fraction, like 3/4. The way you would read it, though, is 3/4. 3:4 is 3/4, or the word 2, 3/4. Proportion is an equation that states that two ratios are equivalent. Cross product, or product multiplication of a proportion, the cross product of a proportion should always be the same. So which means if you multiply the means times the extremes, they should always be equal. You can use this idea to find a missing variable in an algebraic proportion. Let's look at example 1. We have 3/5 is equal to 6 over v, but we don't know what v is. Now, if you've had math B before, this is a proportion where we have an unknown, and you remember how you cross multiplied and then divide? Well, the algebraic method is very similar to this. You are going to use what's called cross multiplication. So we're going to multiply the 5 times the 6 and the v times the 3. Now my arrowheads show on which side of the equation I'm going to write my answer. This step is called cross multiplication, and it says if it's needed. The way you know that you need to use cross multiplication in an equation is if either you have a fraction on both sides of the equation and nothing else like what we have here, or if you have a complex fraction on one or both the sides. Complex fractions, I'm going to define what a complex fraction is for you. Complex fraction, you might want to write this down. Can't remember if I've defined it before in previous lessons or not. A complex fraction is a fraction with two or more terms on the denominator or on the numerator or denominator. Does not matter which side, which the top or the bottom it's at, numerator or denominator. An example of a complex fraction would be like 2 plus x over 3. This is complex because we have two terms on our numerator. X over 3 is not complex because there's only a one term over a one term. So we're going to see some examples with complex fractions a little bit later. I'll go ahead and leave that up for right now in case you're still writing. Back to our example problem, or our focus question. We have a fraction on both sides and you're cross multiplying. Now I know my pen color is kind of covering up what we need to see here. Okay. So I'm going to use, wrong tool, I need my eraser. I'm going to use a highlighter instead of a pen so that you can still see the numbers in between. So I need to multiply my 3 times my v multiplied by my 5 times my 6. And my answers are going to go on the same side of the equation as my arrowheads. So cross multiplication, 3 times v is 3v is equal to 5 times 6 is 30. That's the cross multiplication step. Now we can use the rest of our steps. The letter C, D, I, C, I, C helps you remember all the steps to solving an equation. So the next step is distribution. It says if needed. How do you know if you need distribution? Remember, it has to have parentheses. There's no parentheses, so we don't need to do that step. Next step, identify your variable or identify your terms. Our variable terms are going to get a circle and our constants are going to get a square. Our variable terms are already on the left and our constants are already on the right, so we're ready to combine like terms, which there's only one circle and one square, so all of our like terms have already been combined. We don't need to do that step. Next step is isolating our variable. So if you look at your variable, the v, look what's with it. It's the 3. It's beside it, so we have to divide it. So our answer is v is equal to 10, because 30 divided by 3 is 10. If you wanted to check your answer, you could plug it in that 10 right here and see if that's equal. Does 3/5 equal 6/10? Or does 6/10 reduce down to 3/5? Yes, it does. So that's how you can check it. I'm going to do 2 more example problems for you, and then you're going to do the group practice on the next page. So in this focus question 2, we have a fraction on one side and we have a fraction on the other, so we do know we need to use cross multiplication here, but it also reconfirms that we need to use cross multiplication because our second fraction happens to be that complex fraction I was talking about before. There's 2 terms on that denominator. So that reminds us that we do use cross multiplication. I'll get my highlighter again so you can see I need to multiply in this direction and in this direction. So I write 2 times x plus 9. You generally would write the expression with the least amount of terms on the outside and the ones with the most terms on the inside. So you would not write x plus 9 times 2 like this. That's just goofy. Then 6 times 8. 6 times 8 is 48. Write it over here on this side. So watch your arrowheads and where you're going to play with. If you've done it the other way, you are going to get the correct answer because this is an equation. But in future lessons, when we get into inequalities, you will get it wrong if you put your answers on the wrong side of the symbol there. So let's just get in the same habit. So we've cross multiplied. Our next step is to distribute. We do have parentheses, so you have to distribute that 2. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 9 is positive 18 equals 48. Ready to identify our terms. And I'm going to take off the training wheels just for a second. Can you find your variable term and your constants so that you know if you need to, in the next step, combine like terms? What terms do you need to combine? Always the constants first. So there's our constants. Which one are you going to move, the 48 or the 18? Hopefully you said 18, so we're going to subtract 18. We're combining like terms now. So 2x is equal to 48 and negative 18. Those are opposite signs, so you have to subtract. So that would be 30. We've combined our like terms. Now we're ready to isolate our variable. 2x, or 2 beside the x, so we have to divide by 2, divide by 2. So our final answer is x is equal to 15. You could plug it into the original answer to check your work. Last one. Again, you're going to cross multiply because we have a complex fraction this time on both sides. It doesn't matter which side there's a complex fraction. If you see complex fraction, the first step you always need to do is to cross multiply. Alright, so I will cross multiply that n minus 5 times the 8. Now that 8 is being multiplied to the whole quantity n minus 5, so I need to make sure I put it inside parentheses. Same thing. Ooh, and I didn't follow my rule about where I write my answers. Look where my arrowhead, that 8 times n minus 5 needs to belong over here on this side. We're just going to stay consistent. The 10 times n minus 1, so you write 10 times n minus 1. Look where the arrowhead's at, so it's telling me it needs my answer when I multiply those together need to be on the left-hand side. Done with cross multiply, I'm ready to distribute. 10 times n is 10n. 10 times negative 1, don't forget the sign, is negative 10, is equal to, distribute the 8. Don't get lazy, man. Draw those arrows so that you know what you're multiplying. 8 times n is 8n. 8 times negative 5 is negative 40. Excuse me, I'm yawning. Distribution method's done. We're ready to identify our terms. I'm going to choose a different color here because otherwise we're going to get too many lines on the drawing. So now we have a variable term, a constant, a variable term, and a constant. So this was an example when we have variables on both sides. What did I recommend if you have variables on both sides of the equation? Put your variables on the left and your constants on the right, or circles on the left and squares on the right. So that means I need to move my 8n over here on this side because the variables need to be on my left, and my constants, that negative 10, needs to be on the right. So plus 10 on this side. So we identified our terms and made sure that our terms are on the same side of the equation as one another, and we're ready to combine. 10n and negative 8 is positive 2n is equal to negative 40 and positive 10 are opposite signs, so that's negative 30. Final step, and I'm out of room here on the bottom, so I'm going to have to write it over here on the side. I have 2n is equal to negative 30. It's beside it, so I have to divide it. Can I squeeze a little 2 down there? Yeah. That means your final answer is n is equal to negative 30 divided by 2 is negative 15. That's your final answer for Focus 3. Alright, do the practice questions on the next page, and then you can check your work.